In the silent, sun-drenched rooms of a sprawling Beverly Hills mansion, time wasn't measured in hours, but in heartbeats of despair. This was the world of Clara Vance, a girl who once danced on air, now a prisoner in her own body, confined to a wheelchair. Her mother, Eleanor Vance, a titan of industry and a billionaire CEO, could buy anything in the world: the best doctors, the most advanced technology, a private wing in any hospital. But she couldn't buy back her daughter's hope. Every day was a repeat of the last, a symphony of sterile silence and shattered dreams. But what happens when the one person who can reignite a flicker of life isn't a world-renowned surgeon, but a simple carpenter with calloused hands and a wounded heart of his own? What happens when a quiet whisper becomes more powerful than a billion-dollar fortune? This is the story of how a single dad looked into the abyss of a young girl's soul and said the four words that would change everything: "I'll help her." The mansion at 1020 Crescent Drive was less a home and more a monument to success. Its white marble floors gleamed under recessed lighting, reflecting abstract art pieces that cost more than most suburban houses. This was the empire Eleanor Vance had built. As the CEO of Vance Innovations, a leader in biotech and renewable energy, her name was synonymous with ruthless efficiency and visionary ambition. She was a widow, having lost her husband, Robert, to a sudden aneurysm 5 years prior, an event that had only sharpened her focus, channeling her grief into an unstoppable drive for work. But on the second floor in a suite overlooking the meticulously manicured gardens was the one part of her life she couldn't innovate her way out of, the one problem her vast fortune couldn't solve: her daughter, Clara. Clara, at 19, should have been away at Juilliard, her lithe frame spinning across a stage, her passion for dance igniting the air. Instead, she was a still life portrait of tragedy. A car accident 18 months ago had stolen everything: a slick road, a moment of impact, and a severed spinal cord at the T10 vertebra. From the waist down, she felt nothing. Her room was a state-of-the-art medical facility disguised with plush fabrics and designer furniture. A voice-activated environmental control system, a ceiling-mounted lift for transfers, a bed that could articulate into a dozen positions to prevent sores. Eleanor had ensured Clara had the best of everything: a gilded cage of unparalleled comfort and technology. But it was a cage nonetheless. The girl in the wheelchair bore little resemblance to the vibrant photos that still lined the hallway. Her auburn hair, once a wild cascade of curls, was now lank and tied back. Her green eyes, once sparkling with mischief and life, were now flat, clouded with a permanent storm of resignation. She spent her days staring out the window at the gardens she couldn't walk in, her hands resting limply on the wheels of her $50,000 custom-built chair. "Clara," Eleanor's voice was crisp, cutting through the morning silence. She stood in the doorway, already dressed in a sharp gray power suit, her blonde hair pulled into a severe chignon. A tablet was clutched in one hand. "Dr. Matthews has reviewed your latest scans. He sees no degradation, which is positive." Clara didn't turn. "Define positive, Mother. Is it positive as in I'm not actively dying? Or positive as in there's a snowball's chance in hell I'll ever feel my own 2 feet again?" Eleanor's jaw tightened. This was their daily ritual. Eleanor would approach with clinical updates, a list of new specialists, or experimental treatments. Clara would respond with a barrage of cynicism so sharp it could draw blood. "Sarcasm doesn't change the medical facts, Clara." "No, but it's one of the few things I can still feel." She finally turned her head, her gaze sweeping over her mother's immaculate appearance. "Big meeting today? Another billion to be made?" Eleanor's perfect facade cracked, just for a second, revealing a flicker of deep, profound pain. Guilt was a constant companion, a ghost that sat at her board meetings and lay beside her in her empty king-size bed. She had been the one driving that day. Rushing from one meeting to another, her mind on a hostile takeover bid, she'd taken the canyon road to save 10 minutes. 10 minutes that had cost her daughter a lifetime. The official report cleared her of fault, an oil slick from a previous accident. But in the court of her own conscience, she was guilty as charged. "I'm funding a new research grant at Stanford," Eleanor said, her voice softer. "They're making progress with neural regeneration. It's promising. Clara gave a hollow laugh. Promise. That's a word for people who still have something to look forward to. Just leave the breakfast, Mother, and tell Nurse Holloway I don't need my range of motion exercises today. The range is 0. It will be 0 tomorrow. Eleanor placed the tray on a nearby table. A perfectly prepared meal of fruit, yogurt, and whole grain toast. Untouched, just like the day before. She looked at her daughter, this beautiful, broken girl, and felt a familiar wave of helplessness wash over her. She could command a boardroom of 50 people, sway global markets with a single decision, but she couldn't reach the person sitting 10 feet away from her. She had tried everything. Therapists who Clara refused to speak to, support groups she mocked, hobbies she wouldn't attempt. I have to go, Eleanor said, her voice returning to its default business-like tone. It was her armor. I'll be home by 7. She walked out without another word, the click of her heels on the marble floor echoing the ticking of a clock in a life that had come to a standstill. Clara waited until the sound of her mother's car faded down the long driveway. Then she wheeled herself over to the window. She watched a gardener below, a man tending to the roses, his back strong as he knelt in the dirt. He could stand up whenever he wanted. He could walk away. He could feel the grass beneath his feet. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. She didn't bother to wipe it away. Hope, she thought, was the cruelest lie of all. And hers had died on that cold, unforgiving stretch of asphalt a year and a half ago. A week later, the west wing of the Vance estate was a place of controlled chaos. Eleanor had commissioned a new, fully accessible art studio for Clara, a last-ditch attempt to coax her daughter back to the one passion she had besides dance. It was another grand gesture, another project to be managed, another problem to be solved with money. The man hired to build the custom shelving and accessible workstations was Liam O'Connell. At 34, Liam had the sturdy, weathered look of a man who worked with his hands. His sandy brown hair was perpetually tousled, and his blue eyes held a quiet, observant depth. He was a single father, his life revolving around his 8-year-old daughter, Lily, after his wife Sarah had lost a long and brutal battle with multiple sclerosis 3 years ago. Liam was known for his craftsmanship, but more so for his reliability. He arrived on time, worked quietly and efficiently, and cleaned up after himself meticulously. He was aware of the hushed stories about the CEO's daughter, the tragic princess in the tower, but he paid them no mind. He was here to do a job. His daughter Lily often came with him to job sites during the summer. She was a bright, curious girl with a constellation of freckles across her nose and her father's kind eyes. She also had a slight stutter, a small hesitation in her speech that made her shy around strangers. She would sit quietly in a corner of the room where Liam was working, drawing in her sketchbook and creating entire worlds on paper. One afternoon, Nurse Holloway was taking Clara on her mandated tour of the grounds. Clara hated it. She felt like an exhibit, a fragile piece of art being paraded around for the staff to pity. She directed her motorized chair with sullen, jerky movements, her face a mask of indifference. As they passed the west wing, the scent of freshly cut oak filled the air. Lily, sitting on a drop cloth just outside the open French doors, looked up from her drawing. Her eyes widened as she saw Clara. She had never seen someone so beautiful, like a sad queen from one of her storybooks. Forgetting her shyness, she stood up and took a hesitant step forward. Hello, she said, her small voice barely a whisper. Nurse Holloway immediately went into gatekeeper mode. Now, little one, Miss Vance is having her private time. But Clara stopped her chair. She looked at the little girl, at the sketchbook clutched in her hand, at the pencil smudges on her cheek. For the first time in months, her expression wasn't one of anger or despair, but of simple curiosity. What are you drawing? Clara asked, her voice raspy from disuse. Lily's shyness returned. She looked to the doorway where her father had just appeared, wiping his hands on a rag. Liam's eyes met Clara's, and he saw it all in a single unguarded moment. The profound loneliness, the bone-deep weariness, the flickering ember of a soul that had all but given up. It was a look he knew all too well. He had seen it in his wife's eyes in her final months. Lily, honey, don't bother Miss Vance, Liam said gently. She's not bothering me, Clara stated, her gaze still on the little girl. Show me. Hesitantly, Lily walked over and held up her sketchbook. On the page was a fantastical drawing of a dragon with shimmering, iridescent wings, breathing not fire, but a stream of colorful flowers. A ghost of a smile touched Clara's lips. It was a fleeting, fragile thing, but it was there. He's breathing flowers. He doesn't want to burn the world, Lily explained softly. He wants to, make it beautiful. An unexpected lump formed in Clara's throat. He wants to make it beautiful. The simple, profound innocence of the thought struck her like a physical blow. Liam watched the exchange, his heart aching for the young woman in the chair. He saw past the Vance fortune, past the cold mansion, and saw a girl trapped in a life she didn't choose, drowning in a silence no one knew how to break. That evening, as Liam was packing up his tools, Eleanor Vance swept into the nearly finished studio, her presence immediately commanding the space. "Mr. O'Connell," she said, her eyes scanning his work with critical approval. "The joinery is impeccable. You'll be finished by Friday as scheduled?" "Yes, ma'am. Ahead of schedule, most likely." "Excellent." She was about to turn and leave, her business concluded, when Liam spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "Mrs. Vance, about your daughter." Eleanor froze, her back to him. No one on her staff ever dared to speak of Clara so directly. "I beg your pardon." "I saw her today, with my Lily," he continued, undeterred by her icy tone. "I used to be a physical therapist, specialized in neurological trauma, before I started doing this." He gestured around the room. Eleanor turned slowly, her expression a mixture of surprise and suspicion. "A physical therapist? Your resume says you're a master carpenter." "I am," Liam said. "Some things change. But what I saw today, the way she looked at my daughter's drawing, the life isn't gone from her, Mrs. Vance. It's just buried. It's buried under the diagnosis, under the prognosis, under all this." He swept his hand, indicating not just the room, but the entire opulent, sterile environment. Eleanor's defenses went up instantly. "My daughter has the best medical team in the country. We are pursuing every viable treatment option." "I'm sure you are," Liam said calmly, his gaze unwavering. "But doctors treat the injury. They prescribe medicine and run tests. They don't always know how to treat the person. They don't know how to help someone find a reason to fight when they believe the war's already lost." The rawness of his words hit Eleanor, disarming her. He was speaking a truth she hadn't allowed herself to fully articulate. "What are you suggesting?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Liam took a deep breath, the words coming from a place of deep, personal conviction. He thought of his wife, of the small victories they had celebrated, of the way he'd learned to help her find joy not in walking, but in feeling the sun on her face. He looked directly at the most powerful woman in the Los Angeles business world and made an offer that had nothing to do with money or fame. It was simple, quiet, and profound. "Let me talk to her, not as a therapist, just as a person. She needs to feel like a person again, not a patient, not a project." He paused, his voice dropping to a near whisper, filled with an empathy that transcended the space between them. "I'll help her." Eleanor Vance did not get to where she was by making decisions based on emotion. Every move was calculated, every risk assessed. A carpenter with a lapsed physical therapy license offering to help her daughter where a team of specialists had failed? It was illogical, it was absurd, and yet she agreed. Perhaps it was the memory of the fleeting smile on Clara's face when she saw Lily's drawing. Perhaps it was the quiet confidence in Liam's eyes, a confidence born not of arrogance but of experience and empathy. Or perhaps, deep down, she was simply a desperate mother who had finally exhausted all the logical options. She laid out the terms with the precision of a corporate contract. "You will be compensated for your time. You will report to me weekly. Nurse Holloway will be present at all times. If I see no progress, or worse, any regression, this arrangement is terminated immediately." Liam simply nodded. "I don't want your money, Mrs. Vance. Just give me an hour a day. And please ask the nurse to give us some space. A prisoner can't heal if the guard is always watching." Reluctantly, Eleanor conceded. The first session was painfully awkward. Liam found Clara in her room staring out the window. Lily was with him, a peace offering armed with her sketchbook. "Your mother said I could spend some time with you," Liam said, keeping his tone light. Clara's eyes were cold. "Did she? I suppose she's paying you well for the Clara sitting service." "She offered," Liam replied, pulling up a small ottoman and sitting down, placing himself at her eye level. "I said no." This surprised her. "Why not? Too proud?" "Too pointless," he said. "You can't put a price on a conversation. It makes it a transaction. We're just here to talk." Lily, sensing the tension, shyly approached Clara's chair and held up a new drawing. This time, it was of a girl in a wheelchair, but the wheels were made of brilliant, spinning galaxies. Clara stared at it, her throat tight. "Why is she in a chair?" Because her legs are sleeping," Lily whispered, "but she can fly anywhere she wants, in her mind." Clara looked from the drawing to Liam, who just gave a small, understanding smile. He didn't offer platitudes. He didn't say, "You can do anything you set your mind to." He just let his daughter's art do the talking. For the next week, their time together followed a similar pattern. Liam didn't bring up therapy, exercise, or recovery. Instead, he brought the world to her. He'd bring in different types of wood, oak, cherry, maple, and have her feel the grain, smell the distinct scent of each. He talked about how a single, flawed piece of wood could become the most beautiful part of a finished piece of furniture. He noticed her long, elegant fingers, currently idle in her lap. "You have an artist's hands," he said one day. "They're useless," she retorted. "No, they're just bored." The next day, he came in with a lump of soft clay. He didn't ask her to make anything. He just placed it on the table in front of her. "It's just mud, Clara. You can't fail at mud." For 2 days, she ignored it. On the third day, he found her idly pinching and rolling a piece between her fingers. By the end of the week, a small, misshapen bird sat on her table. It was clumsy and amateurish, but it was something. It was a creation. The real breakthrough came not from Liam, but from Lily. While Liam was talking to Clara, Lily was exploring the new, unused art studio. "Your mommy said this is for you," Lily said, her head poking around the door. "It's so big." Clara wheeled herself to the doorway and looked in. She hadn't set foot in it since it was completed. The smell of paint and turpentine, once her favorite scent in the world, now felt like an accusation. Canvases stood blankly on easels. Jars of expensive brushes were untouched. "I don't paint anymore," Clara said flatly. "Why not?" "Because it requires me to stand, to move, to have a perspective I can't get from a chair." Liam watched from the hallway, staying silent. This was a conversation for them. Lily tilted her head. "But you can see, and your hands work." She walked over to an easel and looked at it thoughtfully. Then she looked back at Clara's chair. "The easel is wrong." Liam stepped in. "What do you mean, sweetie?" "It's too tall," Lily said simply. "It's a standing-up easel. Clara's sitting down." The simplicity of the observation was staggering. Eleanor, in all her efficiency, had built a perfect studio for the daughter she remembered, not the daughter she had. The world-class architects and designers had overlooked the most fundamental detail. Clara stared at the easel, a symbol of everything she couldn't do, and for the first time, her anger was directed at the object, not herself. Without a word, Liam went to his truck. He came back with a saw and a measuring tape. He didn't ask for permission. He walked over to the expensive, custom-made easel. "Wait," Clara said, a note of alarm in her voice. "That cost a fortune." "It's just wood," Liam said, echoing his earlier sentiment. "And right now, it's useless wood." He measured from Clara's eye level in her chair, made a mark, and with 2 quick, precise cuts, he shortened the legs of the easel. He then mounted it on a low, rolling base he fashioned from scrap lumber. He wheeled it over to her, positioning it at the perfect height and angle. He then found a long, lightweight stick of bamboo. With a bit of tape and a clamp, he fashioned a rudimentary mouth stick, a tool used by artists with limited hand function, just to show her possibilities. He placed a brush in it. "There are always ways, Clara," he said softly. "You just have to stop looking for the old way. You have to find your new way." He didn't push her to paint. He just left the modified easel there. That night, long after Liam and Lily had gone home, Clara wheeled herself into the silent studio. The moon cast long shadows across the floor. She looked at the easel, now her height. It wasn't mocking her anymore. It was waiting for her. With trembling fingers, she picked up a piece of charcoal. She didn't try to create a masterpiece. She just made a mark. A single, dark, deliberate line on a stark white canvas. It wasn't a dance. It wasn't a leap, but it was movement. And in the silent, cavernous mansion, it was a start. A fragile glimmer of trust in the possibility of a new way forward. Eleanor Vance reviewed Liam's progress with the cautious optimism of a venture capitalist, watching a high-risk startup show its first positive quarter. She saw the small changes in Clara. The untouched food trays were now sometimes half-eaten. The silence was occasionally punctuated by a soft-spoken question. She had even heard the faint sound of music coming from Clara's room, a classical station, something Clara hadn't listened to since the accident. And then there was the charcoal line on the canvas, a discovery that made Eleanor's heart both ache and soar. But she was still Eleanor Vance. Hope needed to be vetted, cross-referenced, and backed by expert opinion. That expert was Dr. Alistair Finch. Dr. Finch was a neurosurgeon with a God complex and a media profile to match. He was the head of the Finch Institute in Zurich, a man who promised miracles wrapped in cutting-edge science. He was everything Liam was not: polished, credentialed, arrogant, and incredibly expensive. Eleanor had been courting him for a consultation for months. Now he was finally in Los Angeles and had agreed to see Clara. He arrived at the mansion like a visiting head of state, flanked by 2 junior fellows. He barely glanced at the art on the walls, his focus entirely on the case file: Clara. His assessment was swift and dismissive of Clara's current state. He saw a damaged spine, not a broken spirit. The girl's depressive state is a predictable symptom of her condition, he said to Eleanor in the study, out of Clara's earshot. It's a biochemical response to trauma. It can be managed with medication. What we need to focus on is the core problem. He pulled up a complex 3D rendering of a spinal column on his tablet. I'm pioneering a procedure: an epidural stimulation implant combined with stem cell injections directly at the site of the lesion. It's aggressive, it's risky, but it offers the only real chance of reactivating dormant neural pathways. We could see significant motor function return. She could walk again, Eleanor. He said the magic words. She could walk again. It was the promise Eleanor had been chasing, the one she'd poured millions into researching. When Liam and Lily arrived for their afternoon session, they walked into a changed atmosphere. The air was thick with a clinical tension. Dr. Finch was in Clara's room, asking her a series of cold, detached questions, poking and prodding her insensate legs as his fellows took notes. Clara was pale and withdrawn, her shields fully raised once more. Dr. Finch looked up as Liam entered, his eyes dismissing the carpenter in his work clothes. And you are? This is Liam O'Connell, Eleanor said quickly. He's been assisting with Clara's morale. Finch raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. Morale? How quaint. Miss Vance doesn't need a cheerleader. She needs a surgeon. He turned back to Clara. The choice, of course, is yours. But hope is not a strategy. Science is. Later, after the medical entourage had departed, leaving behind a wake of sterile documents and terrifying possibilities, Liam found Clara staring at the modified easel. She looked smaller, more fragile than ever. He called you a cheerleader, Clara said, her voice brittle. I've been called worse, Liam said, sitting in his usual spot. He said he could fix me. Liam chose his words carefully. He said he could perform a surgery. That's not the same thing. But what if he can? Her voice cracked. What if I could walk again, dance again? The old dream, the one she had so brutally suppressed, was resurfacing, and it was agonizing. And what if you can't? Liam asked gently. What if the surgery fails, or makes things worse? Where does that leave you? Back here, she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. It leaves me back here, with nothing. That's not true, Liam said firmly. You're not nothing, Clara. You're not a broken machine that needs fixing. You're a person. What you did in that studio, That line on the canvas, that was you. Not your legs, not your spine. You. Don't let him take that away. His words were a lifeline, but the allure of Finch's promise was powerful. The conflict raged within her, and it spilled over to Eleanor. That evening, Eleanor summoned Liam to her office. She had a contract on her desk, a multi-million-dollar agreement with the Finch Institute. "I'm sending her to Zurich," Eleanor stated. "The surgery is scheduled for next month." "Did you ask her what she wants?" Liam asked, his voice tight with a frustration he could no longer hide. "I am doing what is best for her. I will not let her give up and resign herself to this." "Resign herself to what?" Liam shot back, his quiet demeanor gone, replaced by a fierce passion. "To finding a new way to live? To discovering that her worth isn't tied to whether or not she can do a pirouette? You're so obsessed with fixing her old life that you're not letting her build a new one." "And what do you know about it?" Eleanor snapped, her composure finally breaking. "You, a carpenter who quit his real job? What gives you the right to stand here and tell me how to care for my daughter?" The blow landed. Liam's face hardened, the color draining from it. The ghost he lived with every day had just been thrown in his face. "You want to know why I quit?" he said, his voice low and dangerous. "My wife, Sarah, she had MS. I was the best PT in the state. I designed her exercises. I modified our home. I read every single research paper. I pushed her, Eleanor. I pushed her to fight, to try harder, to believe that if she just did everything right, she could beat it." He paused, the memory raw and painful. "And all it did was make her feel like a failure every time she couldn't. The day she died, she told me the happiest she'd been in years was when I finally gave up on fixing her and just sat with her, holding her hand, watching the sunset. I spent years trying to get her back on her feet, and I almost missed the chance to just be with her, right where she was." He looked at Eleanor, his eyes blazing with a sorrowful intensity. "I'm not trying to fix Clara. I'm trying to keep you from making the same mistake I did. Dr. Finch is selling you a lottery ticket, and he doesn't care if you lose. All he sees is a prestigious case. I see your daughter, and she is worth more than that." He turned and walked out, leaving a stunned and silent Eleanor Vance alone in her marble office, the multi-million-dollar contract feeling as cold and heavy as a tombstone on her desk. Liam's words haunted Eleanor. She tried to dismiss them as the bitter ramblings of a man marked by his own tragedy, but they had lodged themselves deep in her conscience. For the first time, she began to question the path she was so determinedly paving for Clara. Was she trying to heal her daughter, or was she trying to erase her own crippling guilt? In the days that followed, an uneasy truce settled over the mansion. The trip to Zurich was still on the table, a looming monolith in their conversations, but it was no longer spoken of as a certainty. Meanwhile, Liam continued his quiet work. He shifted his focus to tangible, achievable goals, small victories that belonged to Clara alone. He noticed how she struggled to reach books on the lower shelf of her bookcase from the side of her chair. The next day, he returned with a beautifully crafted, long-handled grabber with a padded, articulated claw he had designed. It was a simple thing, but it gave her a piece of independence back. He and Lily helped Clara plant a small container garden on her patio. They chose herbs, mint, rosemary, basil, things she could touch and smell, things that would grow and thrive under her care. Tending to the small pots became a part of her daily routine. It was another small act of creation, of nurturing life. Her progress in the art studio was slow but steady. The single charcoal line had been joined by others. A sketch of Lily's face, surprisingly accurate, a study of her own hand. She hadn't touched the paints yet, but she was reconnecting with her artistic self, line by line. One afternoon, Liam arrived to find her in a state of quiet excitement. "Look," she said, pointing to her big toe. With intense concentration, a small muscle in her calf flickered, and the toe wiggled. It was a tiny, almost imperceptible movement, a muscle twitch. Medically, it was classified as a spasm, a common occurrence in spinal cord injuries. But to Clara, it was a miracle. "Did you see that?" she gasped, her eyes wide with a hope so pure it was heartbreaking. "Liam, I did that! I felt it!" Liam's heart sank even as he forced a smile. He knew what it likely was, but he couldn't bring himself to crush her spirit. That's incredible, Clara. The toe wiggle became her obsession. She would spend hours staring at her feet, trying to replicate the movement. It was the first signal from her lower body in 18 months, and she clung to it like a castaway to a piece of driftwood. It was proof she believed that Dr. Finch was right, that the connection wasn't completely severed, that she could be whole again. The change in her was dramatic. She was energized, animated. She talked to her mother about Zurich with genuine enthusiasm. Eleanor, swept up in her daughter's hope, pushed aside her doubts and finalized the arrangements. The surgery was booked. Then came the storm. A fierce autumn rain swept through Los Angeles, turning the sky a bruised purple. The wind howled, rattling the large plate glass windows of Clara's room. That night, she was having trouble sleeping, her mind buzzing with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. She needed a drink of water. Instead of using the call button to summon Nurse Holloway, a small act of defiance and independence, she decided to get it herself. She transferred from her bed to her wheelchair, a maneuver she had performed 1,000 times. But tonight, her hands were slick with sweat. As she positioned herself, her hand slipped on the armrest. Her body, unbalanced, twisted awkwardly. She fell. It wasn't a long drop, but she landed hard on the floor, her leg bent unnaturally beneath her. She felt no pain, only the sickening, dull thud of bone and flesh hitting the marble floor, followed by a terrifying cold numbness that was different from her usual paralysis. Then came the shock. She lay on the cold floor, helpless, unable to move. The glass of water she'd wanted shattered just out of reach. Nurse Holloway found her minutes later. The aftermath was a blur of frantic activity. Paramedics, a trip to the emergency room, hushed conversations between doctors. The diagnosis was a spiral fracture of the femur in her left leg. A clean break, but a severe one. The physical setback was bad enough. It meant a heavy cast, immobility, and the risk of complications. But the emotional devastation was absolute. When Liam came to the hospital the next day, he found a stranger. The glimmer of hope in Clara's eyes had been extinguished, replaced by a black hole of despair. She was back in the bed, a prisoner once again. The heavy white cast a physical manifestation of her shattered dreams. The toe wiggle was just a spasm, she said, her voice a dead monotone. The doctor told me, a meaningless electrical misfire. It meant nothing. She turned her face to the wall. He was right. Dr. Finch, hope is not a strategy. Her hope hadn't just disappeared. It had been revealed as a cruel illusion, making its loss 1,000 times more painful. She refused to speak to anyone, including her mother. She wouldn't eat. She wouldn't look at the get-well cards that began to arrive. Dr. Finch, contacted in Zurich, was clinical. The surgery would have to be postponed indefinitely until the fracture healed, a process that would take months and would be complicated by her paralysis. There was an undercurrent of annoyance in his tone, as if Clara had inconvenienced him by breaking her own leg. Clara had not just fallen to the floor, she had fallen back into the abyss, and this time, it seemed she was determined to pull everyone in with her. The tentative progress they had made, the trust they had built, the new ways they had found, it all lay shattered on the floor, as broken as her leg, as broken as her heart. The hospital room was a vacuum of silence. The beeping of monitors was the only sound, a heartless metronome marking the passage of wasted time. Clara had retreated so far into herself that she was almost unreachable. She stared at the ceiling for hours, her expression blank, her eyes vacant. She was a ghost haunting her own body. Eleanor was adrift. Her usual methods, making calls, demanding action, throwing money at the problem, were useless. Dr. Finch was distant. The Stanford researchers offered academic condolences, and the hospital staff could only provide medical maintenance. Her daughter was fading before her eyes, and all of her power and influence meant nothing. Liam's words echoed in her mind. I almost missed the chance to just be with her, right where she was. One night, unable to bear the sterile silence of the mansion, Eleanor returned to the hospital long after visiting hours should have ended. She found Liam sitting in the hallway outside Clara's room. He hadn't been allowed in. Clara had refused him, just like everyone else, but he had come anyway. He was holding a small, intricately carved wooden bird in his hands, whittling away at it with a small knife. "There's no point," Eleanor said, her voice heavy with defeat as she sank into the chair beside him. "She won't see you. She won't see anyone." Liam didn't look up from his work. "So we sit, we wait. That's all we can do." "It's not enough," Eleanor whispered, the words catching in her throat. "I've failed her. I failed her the day of the accident, and I'm failing her now." "This isn't your fault," Liam said, his voice soft but firm. "It was an accident." Tears, hot and unfamiliar, began to stream down Eleanor's face. The dam of composure she had maintained for 18 months finally broke, releasing a torrent of guilt and grief. "No!" she choked out, the word torn from the deepest part of her soul. "No! It wasn't just an accident. It was me." Liam stopped whittling, his full attention now on her. "We were late," Eleanor began, her voice trembling as she confessed the truth she had never spoken aloud. "Late for a meeting I had insisted on scheduling. Clara wanted to take the freeway. It was safer. But I was on the phone, closing a deal, a hostile takeover of a rival firm. It was vicious. I was yelling at my lawyer, completely consumed by it." She took a ragged breath, the memory playing out in vivid, horrifying detail behind her eyes. "I took the canyon road to save time, to get to the meeting where I could make another $1 million. Clara was telling me to slow down, to pay attention. There were warning signs about the road conditions. I saw them, but I didn't register them. My mind was on the deal." She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. "When the car started to skid on the oil slick, my first instinct wasn't to correct the wheel. It was to brace the phone, to protect the call." The confession hung in the sterile air of the hospital corridor, ugly and raw. She was trapped in the car, and all I could think was, I did this. My ambition, my greed, I did this to her. I've been trying to fix her body ever since, Liam, because I don't know how to fix the fact that I shattered her life for a business deal. Liam was silent for a long moment, letting the weight of her words settle. He placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You have to tell her," he said simply. "I can't," Eleanor cried. "She'll hate me." "She's already drowning," Liam said, his voice imbued with a gentle urgency. "She thinks she has nothing left to fight for. Maybe she doesn't need a cure. Maybe she needs a reason." "The truth? It's a heavy thing, Eleanor. But sometimes it's the only thing that can anchor a person back to the world." Bolstered by a strength that wasn't her own, Eleanor stood up. She wiped her eyes, took a deep breath, and walked into her daughter's room. She pulled a chair to the bedside, her movements heavy, deliberate. Clara didn't acknowledge her. She just continued to stare at the ceiling. "Clara," Eleanor began, her voice shaking, "there's something I have to tell you. Something about the accident." Slowly, painfully, she recounted the story, leaving nothing out. The phone call, the argument with her lawyer, her obsession with the deal, her fatal decision to take the canyon road, her final, shameful admission about trying to save the phone. She didn't make excuses or ask for pity. She just laid the truth bare. "It wasn't just an oil slick," Eleanor finished, her voice a broken whisper. "It was my fault. I was distracted. I wasn't listening to you. I put my work before your safety. And I am so sorry." For a long time, the room was silent, save for the beeping monitor. Clara slowly turned her head, her vacant eyes finally focusing on her mother. She saw not the powerful CEO, but a broken woman, her face streaked with tears, her carefully constructed world shattered around her. She saw her mother's pain, her guilt, a burden she had carried alone for so long. And in that moment, Clara understood. Her mother's frantic search for a cure, the endless specialists, the pressure to get better. It wasn't about fixing a broken object. It was a desperate, misguided attempt at penance. It was her mother's way of saying, "I'm sorry," because the words themselves were too painful. A single tear rolled down Clara's cheek. "All this time," she whispered, her voice rough, "you've been trying to make me walk again, to forgive yourself." Eleanor nodded, unable to speak, sobbing freely now. Clara reached out her hand, her fingers brushing against her mother's. "I don't hate you, Mom." The words were an absolution. "But you have to stop. Clara continued, her voice gaining a sliver of its old strength. You have to stop trying to turn back the clock. We can't go back. We can only go from here. It wasn't a miracle cure. It wasn't a sudden recovery, but it was a seismic shift. The chasm that had separated them for so long had been bridged by a painful, beautiful, and necessary truth. For the first time since the accident, they were not a CEO and a patient, but a mother and a daughter, united in their shared trauma, ready finally to face the future together, whatever it might hold. The healing of Clara's leg was a slow, arduous process, but the healing of her spirit and of her family had already begun. The confession in the hospital room had broken the fever. The anger and resentment that had poisoned the air in the Vance mansion for so long began to dissipate, replaced by a fragile, tentative understanding. Dr. Finch was dismissed. His calls went unanswered, his emails deleted. The multi-million-dollar contract was shredded. Eleanor Vance had finally understood. The goal wasn't to reclaim the life they had lost, but to build a new one from the pieces they had left. Liam and Lily became a constant presence, not as employees or contractors, but as family. Liam's quiet strength was the bedrock they all leaned on, while Lily's innocent joy was the light that chased away the lingering shadows. When Clara was finally discharged from the hospital, her leg still in a cast, she didn't return to the sterile medical suite on the second floor. At her request, Liam had helped Eleanor redesign the space. The hospital bed was replaced with a normal one. The ceiling lift was removed. In their place were lower bookshelves she could reach, a desk adapted for her chair, and wide-open spaces that were accessible, not clinical. Her room was no longer a cage, but a sanctuary. Her days found a new rhythm. Physical therapy was still a part of it, but the focus was different. It wasn't about trying to walk. It was about building strength and function for the life she was living now. Liam, drawing on his old expertise, worked with her new therapist, suggesting adaptive exercises and techniques that focused on independence and core strength. The art studio became her true domain. With Liam's help, she embraced her new perspective. He built her a rolling palette table and a system of mirrors that allowed her to see her large canvases from different angles. She started using paints, her first piece a stunning abstract of swirling blues and grays, capturing the storm she had weathered. She called it After the Fall. It was powerful, raw, and breathtakingly beautiful. Eleanor, too, underwent a profound transformation. She was still a CEO, but she was no longer just a boss. She started leaving the office at 5. She learned to delegate. She began having dinner with Clara, Liam, and Lily every night at the large dining table that had once felt so empty. Their conversations weren't about prognoses or stock prices, but about Lily's school project, a new painting Clara had started, or a funny story from Liam's day. Eleanor was rediscovering the woman she was before grief and guilt had forged her into a corporate machine. One sunny Saturday afternoon, 6 months after the fall, the four of them were on the patio. Clara, now an expert with her custom-made gardening tools, was tending to her herb garden, showing Lily how to pinch back the basil leaves. Her canvases were selling through a private art dealer for astounding sums, and she was donating a portion of the profits to a spinal cord injury foundation. She was mentoring other young artists with disabilities online, her story becoming an inspiration. Liam was grilling burgers, laughing at a joke Lily told. He and Eleanor shared an easy, comfortable silence, watching the two girls. There was an unspoken affection between them, a bond forged in crisis and tempered in hope. Eleanor looked at her daughter. Clara's hair was a cascade of auburn curls once more, her green eyes bright and alive. She was laughing, her face tilted toward the sun. She was not the same girl who had danced across a stage at Juilliard, and she never would be. She was someone different, someone stronger, someone forged in fire, who had learned that flight didn't require feet, and that a beautiful life could be painted from a seated position. The mansion at 1020 Crescent Drive was no longer a silent monument to success. It was a home, filled with laughter, the smell of paint and charcoal, and the scent of grilled burgers on a Saturday afternoon. It wasn't a fairy tale ending where the princess magically gets up and walks. It was something far more real and far more profound. It was a story of acceptance, of redefined strength, and of the incredible, life-altering power of a simple, human promise, whispered when all hope was lost. I'll help her. In the end, Clara Vance's story isn't about the miracle of walking again. It's about the miracle of living again. It reminds us that true healing often has little to do with curing the body and everything to do with mending the soul. It shows us that the greatest strength isn't found in overcoming impossible odds, but in finding the courage to build a beautiful, meaningful life within the boundaries we are given. The heroes in our lives don't always wear lab coats or carry medical degrees. Sometimes they carry toolboxes and sketchbooks. Sometimes they are the ones who sit with us in the dark, not promising to bring back the sun, but simply promising to wait with us until the new sunrise. If this story of hope, family, and the quiet power of human connection touched your heart, please take a moment to click the like button and share it with someone who might need to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that inspire and remind us of the incredible resilience of the human spirit. Thank you for listening.